today's talk on a topic of considerable interest. We have all heard about it. We have all been intrigued by it, but we have never had an opportunity to learn something about this topic of desalination in some cogent way. It has so many different implications. For some, it will look as though if only we could desalinate seawater, we could solve all the world's problems. From that one extreme to the other of pragmatism about how it will work, there are so many shades of opinions and so many threads of reality. Most of us are totally ignorant about the real significance and the importance and the practicality of this topic of desalination. And by sheer chance and luck, I was able to chance upon today's speaker, Mr. Kevin Price from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, who has recently authored a very important roadmap on the topic of desalination on behalf of the Bureau of Reclamation in collaboration with the Sandia National Laboratories. And it also turns out that he has a very interesting background which fits remarkably well with the spirit of our Colloquium series, in which all of us from various disciplines, from engineering to the humanities, are interested and participate. Kevin has a bachelor's degree in zoology. Nowadays, many people don't know what zoology is. They know about biology and integrative biology and so forth. He got a bachelor's degree in zoology from Idaho, Albertsons College. Then went to Columbia University, got a master's in chemical engineering. That's a good transition. And then he went to Denver, Colorado, and got a master's degree in business administration. So if anybody can talk about the biological implications of desalination, the engineering implications, and the commercial, economic, and other implications, we have the right person. He also happens to have been a leader of a research group in the Bureau of Reclamation and Water Treatment, and he's written the book on desalination. We are in a very fortunate position of learning something substantive about this important topic. It's my pleasure to invite Kevin Price to give his talk today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to be here. I was thinking about knowing all about biology and knowing all about chemical engineering and knowing all about finance, and it really isn't true. I know just very little about a lot of things. But let me take you through some of the things I know about desalination. What I'm going to do is start out pretty broad because I wasn't sure what the background was of the audience. And so I'll hit just on some of the different things and give you kind of a world perspective. Then I'll go into the roadmap that was mentioned earlier. And this was a really fun exercise, but it's far from complete. It's just the beginning of a process. I want to talk a little bit about some of the projects the Bureau is doing to give you a flavor for the things that we work on and some of the concerns we have as an agency within this field. Then I actually would have preferred to spend all the time on the next steps because that's the stuff that's fun right now. That's what we're getting into right now. And I'll hit on some of those, and they'll range from things that we're doing with, well, actually tomorrow, starting for the first time, through some of the things we do internationally. And then I just want to leave you also with some places to go for further information, because one of the things we do a lot of work on is technology transfer. Population. What are the drivers behind desal? Growth of population. We're a Western resources agency. This concerns us tremendously. Why people want to live where it's dry, I have no idea. But then also, I don't live in South Chicago or some dreary place like that. I live in Golden, Colorado, which is a beautiful place. With all those people, we have tremendous water needs. This is a really, really rough calculation. I'm sure there are much better ways of doing it, but basically you take a look at the projected increase in population, how much water are they going to need. Reality is that we're not going to meet this through desalination. We're going to meet it through things such as reuse. That's another technology way of doing it. We'll meet it through conservation. We'll meet it through water transfers. There's a whole slew of things out there that are going to have to be done together. Of course, another driver out there is drought. Historically, there was an additional driver, which was international boundary issues, specifically with Mexico. That doesn't seem to be quite as big at this point with our drought, but it's looming out there. It may happen yet. So here's some of the drivers behind why we have problems with water resources. The growth of the population, need more water. We have drought. We have these what appear to be some sort of a climate pattern that includes drought. We've been kind of a wet series of years lately. We have a much more complex demand. It's not just for agriculture anymore. We've got a lot of other people wanting it. In fact, some that weren't even at the table originally, such as endangered species and Native Americans. We have environmental impacts, and then of course, it's still not totally known what global climate change will do, but I'll tell you, there isn't a lot of snow in the Colorado mountains right now. It's melting really fast. The real big issue when you sit down and talk about desalination is everybody wants to talk about all the different water, all the ways of coming up with additional supplies of water. And when we wrote the roadmap, it was really hard to focus. So we finally came up with this chart and said, here are some of the different ways to deal with water and water supply. And we're only going to focus on the little area on the right-hand side in technology. Now it ends up that my agency is famous for that other area there, dams and diversions. We don't see a lot of that going on right now. But it's interesting, it's been interesting to us to see what can we do with technology and specifically desalination and reuse. And I'm not going to say too much about reuse, but we have a pretty large program in that. The Research Council, when they did their report on envisioning the agenda for water resources research in the 21st century, suggested that new supplies could be enhanced by development of new supply enhancing technologies or reducing the cost of existing technologies. And that's really where we headed with our roadmap, was how do we have a chance to reduce the cost of these technologies? These technologies realistically are still too expensive in the majority of cases. If you're sitting in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and you have no water sources, it may not be so ridiculously expensive, but where there are other sources, it's a problem. Now, it ends up that there are places where there is water that people don't use it, and that can be in our saline aquifers. This is just a rough generalization of where they might be in the US. They are not well characterized, which was something I've only learned in the last year or so. And I'll mention later that we hope to work with USGS to do a better characterization. And of course, I put the fish out here on the side so I don't forget the ocean. It ends up that we have a lot of population that's on the coasts and could look towards the ocean as a water supply source. So the benefits of desalination, basically looking at existing water supplies that aren't currently being used, whether it's brackish or ocean. Drought proofing. If you're pulling from the ocean, at least depending on how you look at it, it's a limitless supply. That's not exactly that simple. It provides local control. If you're sitting at the end of a great big long pipeline or canal or transbasin diversion, local control starts to mean a lot more to you, especially if you're at the end of the pipeline and you don't have a choice as to what happens to your water, or you have minimal choice. It ends up that using technology provides, I forgot the regional redundancy. Along the coast, it provides smaller plants, decentralization of your treatment plants, which then leads into security issues. Produces a very high quality water, and as you use water, you add salt to it. It provides multiple uses of an existing source of water, so it works into recycling. And in fact, when I define desalination, recycling is included in that. And when Senator Simon wrote the Desalination Act, and that's why I'm in this business, at least today, he defined desalination as anything that's suspended or dissolved in water. That's a little bit beyond what most people think. So that really leads into recycling, and what you want to do is to have water that doesn't have a high salt content, because at a certain level it becomes unhealthy. At other levels it is corrosive to pipes and infrastructure. We are seeing a radical change in this technology in the past 20 years, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in the slides. We've seen tremendous decreases in the costs compared to where they were back in the 60s, 70s, 80s even. And of course, it helps to avoid competition for limited water sources if you can find a new, brand new, in quotes, new supply of water. This is something our research director came up with. I guess it justifies my existence as a researcher, but it is true. It's very hard to forecast because many times people underestimate what technology will do, both positive and negative. It's been really fun to watch these tremendous dislocations. In essence, people don't have to string lots and lots of wire for telecommunications anymore. They can do cell phones. Just a lot of neat things. And a few of us actually believe there's still a lot to be learned in desalination, and that's why we've done the roadmap. And of course, what could the water be used for? Cities, industries, rural Native American issues. We have a real big issue in the Intermountain West with all this water that comes up from when you produce gas and oil. We get a lot more water, actually generally contaminated water, than we do gas and oil. It's a real problem environmentally. And I've always, usually I leave off agriculture because it seems so ridiculous. And I have a slide here which will show that actually some people are doing this, and they're doing it economically. Costs of desalination, they're very variable. They're also not apples to apples. So if you're trying to look at one plant, say in Tampa Bay, and they report $2.07 a thousand gallons, and you're looking at a plant in Israel, and they're reporting, of course, in cubic meters, you've got the problem of translation between the units, but then you also find that people neglect to include their land costs, or they neglect to include subsidies, whether it's for land, well, whether it's for electricity or for their water costs. So it's really hard to know. But seawater desal right now is being reported around $650 to $1,000 an acre foot. It can even go higher in very specialized cases. Brackish desalination should be less because there's less salt to take out, but there are a lot of issues surrounding brackish desal, and it's very dependent upon the ions that are in the water. And just in comparison, some of the water that the Bureau of Reclamation had to rent for the Rio Grande this last summer was running at about $350 an acre foot. Metropolitan, if you're buying new water from them, is running, our understanding is about $500 an acre foot. Conservation, $350 to $500. Water recycling, $400 to $800. These are life cycle costs. These aren't just, at least that's my understanding. And of course, bottled water is the fun one, because why anyone would pay $1 per liter for bottled water is still hard to understand. And of course, I have my water with me. So it's, there's a whole psychology to this. There's a whole non-engineering side to water and reuse that we're just starting to investigate right now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the world. There's two competing technologies. One is pretty mature. That's multi-stage flash, this MSF. It's a thermal technology. You boil the water, you condense the vapor. It creates very pure water. You see it all over the Middle East. It ends up that, just as an aside, it ends up that most of the infrastructure in the Middle East was put there, or at least was assisted by the United States. So if it's a bad idea for them to be doing it, it's probably our fault. The red line is the membrane processes, or reverse osmosis. And you can see that over the years that the membrane processes have been overtaking the thermal processes. And in Europe and the United States, it's much more economic to pursue the membrane processes than thermal. Generally in the Middle East, they are dual-purpose plants. They produce both power and water, and you can optimize for power and water. In the United States, we don't have that integration of power and water. And to give you some idea of the magnitude, this is Al Jubail in Saudi Arabia. This plant's about 2 kilometers long. And And over on this side, these are the stacks for where they generate the electricity. These are what are desalting the seawater, and this thing just goes forever. It's huge. It's mind-boggling. It's the world's largest plant. And that's been pumping out water now for probably 20 years. Ships it a little over 100 miles into Riyadh and provides probably 70 to 80% of the city's water. This was one of the reasons why everybody's worried about the desalting plants during the Gulf War. Just to show you a closer close-up of one of the multi-stage flash units. These are all the different stage. This is one unit. It's nice because it's modular. So literally, you can blow one of these things up and keep the plant running. It's an interesting consideration because it does happen. People don't operate them well sometimes. And I mentioned agriculture. It ends up that Spain, who you'd never think of doing desalting, has just put in a tremendous amount of desalting capacity. It also ends up that a portion of this is going to high-value crops that are being sold back into Europe. Very, very, very unusual situation. And of course, here in the United States, we have Tampa Bay. And if anybody has questions about Tampa Bay when I'm done talking, I probably have some information on that one too. This is what got everybody so excited and created desalination fever, to the point where everyone is a desalting expert. And there are real limitations to this technology that are forgotten. Now, Tampa Bay is reverse osmosis. It uses membranes, and I just wanted to be able to show what a membrane element looks like. And they go into these pressure vessels because these pressure vessels are run under about 1,000 to 1,200 psi. And basically, you leave the salt behind, the fresh water goes through, and it's a great plant. Although there is a slight problem, and that is that if the water going into these things has particles in it, those particles tend to sit on the membrane and screw up your process. So you've got to have good pre-treatment, and that's one of the issues that's holding up the startup of the Tampa Bay plant right now. This is the first large seawater plant in the United States. This slide may be just a little bit misleading, but it gets the point across. And it's basically saying that over the years, desalting costs have come down. And I did it both in cubic meters and 1,000 gallons. And I apologize for the mix-up of all these units. But in the West, we use acre feet. In the United States, in drinking water, we use 1,000 gallons. And everybody else in the world uses cubic meters. But generally, we started with some pretty small plants that were quite expensive. And we've seen the costs come down. And Tampa was phenomenally low, everybody thought. And then came Ashkelon 1 and Ashkelon 2. These still seem incredibly low. And now we've got Singapore, which seems incredibly low. And I'll mention at the very end, we do have a workshop that we're setting up right now in the first week of December in Cyprus to bring all the world's experts together and start developing techniques to normalize these costs, to do apples-to-apples comparisons. Every one of these plants is costed in a different way. And so it looks really great, but you've got to dig into how they came up with this stuff. This is a very complicated slide, and I apologize, but I wanted to show you that the costs of desalting have come down for many reasons. It's through engineering improvements. It's incremental improvements. It's not revolutionary stuff. This is the engineers and the vendors doing their job and the marketplace doing its job. And what this basically says is that we have seen the cost, which is right behind this, we've seen the cost come down. So if you start with 1980 and you say that you had $1, it would cost $1 in 1980, we're now down to about 20 cents. So we've seen a pretty good reduction in cost of these RO membranes. At the same time, the other thing up here is productivity. That's how much water goes through these membranes that gets the salt pulled out of it. Well, it ends up that's almost doubled. We're almost up to the 2 line now. So not only have we increased the amount of water going through these things, but the costs of the things themselves have come down dramatically. And then one of the things not to forget is energy. Energy has been the major issue around the use of desalination and continues to be the issue around desalination. But we've got some pretty cool energy recovery technology that's just starting to get up to larger plant scale size. And as you can see, the energy recovery has come down tremendously. we're able to reuse about 95% of the energy that goes into these desal systems through energy recovery. And again, I wanted to show you the radical difference that's occurred over just the last 20, 24 years. We really have seen an efficiency in the use of energy. We're about 95% efficient. The real question is, can we get even more efficient? And there are beliefs within the research community that we can be more efficient, that we can reduce the current use of the energy. And of course, in general, there's another trick behind this energy. This is the energy needed, this is my understanding anyways, the energy needed to do the reverse osmosis process. That doesn't mean the pretreatment, that doesn't mean the pumping up the hills, that doesn't mean all the ancillary stuff. This just means around that membrane to take the pressure up, get the salt pushed off, and get the water through the membrane. And this is a graph that one of our contractors did a number of years ago. But I wanted to show that if you look at electrodialysis, the amount of water, this is basically the amount of water per megawatt of thermal energy that you get. And so you don't get a lot of water out of electrodialysis for the amount of energy that you put in. Multi-stage flash, again, not a lot of water, but multi-effect distillation is actually more efficient. And this is something that we're seeing more and more of going in to replace the MSF. If you take a look at reverse osmosis with the older energy recovery, it's pretty good change in terms of efficiency. And then the idea here was our contractor is VeryRO, and they're showing how much greater they are than this whole thing. But the point is that we actually have about 3 technologies: VeryRO, the Doer, and which is going into some commercial plants right now, and ERI, which is going into commercial plants. VeryRO is yet to go into a commercial plant. But you can see we're continuing to squeeze out the last bits of energy. The cool thing is this one right here. We were looking at Brayton cycle engine. What would happen if we converted the energy source directly into mechanical energy? Not go to electricity and then to mechanical energy, but to go directly to pressure. And that's what this one is all about. And we can actually create some pretty good efficiency. So there's ways of squeezing the energy and recycling the energy, reusing the energy better than we do. In the United States, this is just a map of kind of where the desalting plants are. This doesn't say anything about the size of the plants. This is just the number of the plants. So I don't even know what the average size is, but I can guarantee you on seawater it's very small. Brackish water, we have some large plants, and I started my work on the Yuma desalting plant, which is still probably the largest brackish desalter in the world. Also doesn't run. And it's not because of the technology, it's because it costs so much. And the government doesn't want to spend $30 to $40 million a year to run the plant when there are other ways to get that water to meet the treaty with Mexico, or at least to meet the water quality obligations that we have with Mexico. And this I stole from the U.S. Desalination Coalition. These are some of the plants that they have found that are proposed around the United States. So you can see we've got various brackish plants proposed around the United States. Whoops. Whether it's in Phoenix or other places. We also have some seawater plants, the yellow dots here, including the Great Salt Lake. This is for the policy types. This is the stuff that's being presented to the policy types. So I would say take it with a grain of salt. Again, somewhat desalination fever. Some of this stuff is for real, but I would say the majority is just being talked about. So in terms of reducing costs, where are we today? Well, Tampa Bay taught us some interesting lessons. Creative financing goes a long ways. There's ways of reducing the bond costs through public-private partnerships, things like that. Also, we learned that co-location with existing power plants works out really well to bring down desal costs because we don't have the infrastructure for the intake and the outlet that we normally would have. We can piggyback off the power plant. We also can take a little bit of the heated cooling water, and that improves our desalting process. There is some opportunity for maybe doing some regionalization, build some big plants, bigger plants, bring down costs more, that type of thing. But really, from my perspective, the highest potential to reduce costs is to try to find better ways of doing desalting through research. And that's what the roadmap was about. Now, the roadmap is not a report of the Bureau of Reclamation. This is a sleight of hand. The Bureau of Reclamation is afraid that we might make policy by saying that we support desal. But it is a report of the Executive Committee. And the Executive Committee is pretty cool because darn if we didn't have an economist work with us engineers. And even worse than that, we had a public health expert. We had a real live person, I mean, in the real world, a utility person. We had political scientists. We had, of course, we always have university professors helping us, and then some consultants. They always help us. But we went outside of where we normally would go to get their input. What do they see as essential to make the desal work, and what are the research areas we need to be in? My management, or I should say the Assistant Secretary's office and Department of Interior, wanted to better understand what the value of this roadmap was. And so we ended up taking this to the National Research Council, and they have, in the last month or so, published a report on this. And so if you want, you can get the report off their website, and then of course you can get the roadmap off ours. And I'll talk a little bit about the roadmap. I'll try to summarize this in a simple way, and if you've got questions, I'll be happy to answer them. I don't think I can do justice to the roadmap. What we did is we struggled for at least our first 3 or 4 meetings to figure out what a roadmap was. But what we did is we created a vision statement, and that helped bring us together a bit. We decided we had to figure out what the needs were, and the best way we could figure out needs, the best way to define those was just based on geography, whether it was rural or urban, inland or coastal settings, things like that, and you'll see that in a minute. Defining the critical objectives. It's really important in research to define what you want as your ultimate outcome, and so that's what we're trying to drive to, is to actually create what it is that we want as our outcome. Now, what you'll see in the next slides is that some of our desired outcomes may be impossible, and that's something we have to go back and work on. And then we also wanted to identify the technology areas to do our investments and things like that. On this side, we did a fun little exercise, and we did a little bit of a scenario analysis, and someday we'll have to come back and do more of that. But it's one of these things where you look at, well, what's the worst case, what's the best case, how does desal fit into that type of thing. And so that was our first shot at that, and like I said, maybe in the future we'll do something better. The vision that we came up with, and this is the National Academy's review had some issues with a couple of our words here. But it comes down to what we would like is, by 2020, whatever research we do, we would like to have made our drinking water supply more safe. We're doing it in a sustainable way, in an affordable way, and make sure that we have adequate supplies of water. Now, all these things are really hard to define, and especially when you have an economist and a political scientist and a chemical engineer, their definitions of these things really vary. So it was a great discussion. So as I said, we broke the needs into different geographical areas, and one of them was coastal urban communities. About 54% of the US population lives along the coast or close enough to where a seawater desal plant might have an impact. Depends on how high up you have to pump the water once you desalt it. Various parts of the country have different issues. Tampa Bay is interesting because basically they have a great big sponge here, and they're pumping their sponge dry, and it's hurting the environment. Southern California, we have these major transbasin diversions of water feeding population. Coastal Texas, subsidence and other issues. In fact, they import a lot of water from inland too. So what were the needs? We want to reduce the cost. This biologic stability is a pretty specialized thing, but we want to reduce the reliance on surface water that is needed for estuaries in the coastal regions. We also want to decrease the reliance on remote sources of water. Inland urban areas, these are the Las Vegases, Phoenixes, El Paso, those types of cities. And anyone that's looked at desalination knows that the number one problem in desalination, and it shows up with these cities, is, let's see, oh, I did it again. Let me try. Oh, It's stuck on me. Okay, I'm back. The real issue here is disposal of the concentrate. You don't destroy salt. So where does it go? Big, big problem. And if you take a look at inland desalting, the real cost on inland desalting is not the desalting process. It's the concentrate disposal process, and it can easily double the cost of a desalting plant. So that's where we're investing quite a bit of research dollars right now. And I'm just going to continue on through this and talk about some of the different issues here. You know, rural inland communities, the Bureau of Reclamation is in a strange situation. We're being directed by Congress to build huge centralized treatment plants on the Missouri River, for instance. And these things have huge distribution systems that go out 1,000 miles. Well, it's hard to keep a chlorine residual, that whole bit. So we're looking at point of use treatment, and desalination is a great way to do that. But we're limited by law that we can't pay the operation and maintenance of these things. Well, when you get to point of use, it's all about operation and maintenance. It's not about paying for the infrastructure. I mentioned earlier coal bed methane and the pumping or producing oil and gas. We produce a lot of water in the inland states. This is becoming a real environmental disaster. And in some cases, they actually pay $10 per barrel of water, which is a lot less than 1,000 gallons, to remove the water, to pump it back down into the ground. So desalination all of a sudden starts to look economic in some of these cases. And it ends up that Department of Energy, Sandia, our partners on the roadmap, are pursuing this area. I think that's a great place for DOE to be spending some research dollars. Mid-Atlantic, nobody thinks of the Mid-Atlantic having water problems, but obviously they're overpumping their aquifers. They have tremendous issues about protecting their water supplies, whether it's New York City and all the communities that live up in their watershed area. I even heard recently New York City was looking at desalination of some of the bay. I think it was just a study, but. Now I talked about critical objectives. What we did here is we said, okay, we want to do something in the next 5 to 8 years. We also want to do something over the next 15 to 20 years. And so we have what we call a stretch goal. So the short-term goal, for instance, on keeping water affordable is to be able to reduce the capital cost of a desalting plant by 20%. In the long term, and who knows how we'll ever get there, but it means we got to develop some new technologies, new methods of doing things. We would like to see, as a stretch goal, the capital cost of these plants reduced by 80%. Might mean we have to get rid of the pretreatment. In other words, our membranes do everything. Could be other ways. We want to increase the energy efficiency from where we are today by 20%, and ultimately from where we are today by 80%. People are saying this is impossible. It ends up that it might very well be impossible, and so the next part of our roadmap is to go back. The National Academies have a proposal in with us and EPA and a bunch of the nonprofit research foundations where they would put together a panel of scientists, expert scientists, that would go back and review the different technologies and see where is the theoretical limit, how far can we push these things, and get this onto paper. The last time something like this was done was in about 1962, and it's a great way to try to set goals for researchers to accomplish. And also, it helps people like me to justify the requests for the budgets that we asked from Congress. The other important thing up here is this ZLD, zero liquid discharge. On the inland desalting, ultimately, many of us would like to see where we take out all the water that we can and leave behind the salt. And in essence, landfill the salt in the same way that nature does it in the salt domes and everything else. Now, we won't do it as elegantly as nature. But somehow, for a city like Phoenix, where we have all this Colorado River water going in there, we don't send just water into Phoenix. We send salt into Phoenix. We have mounds and mounds of salt in that water. And it's not being disposed of. It's going into the groundwater. The same is going to be true of desalting. Where is that salt going to go? You can't just send it to the next city down the river. What we really need to do is to figure out an effective way of treating our concentrate, taking it down to salt, and ultimately the dream, which is really, really difficult to accomplish, is are there commercial values to these salts? Are there ways that we can get a product or a value, somebody to pay for them? And these are some of the things on sustainability, and I'll just I'll skip through this real quick. I'd like to get on to some of the other things. We broke the research into technology areas, and we actually came up with 5. I've added a 6th because the National Academy said you forgot something. You forgot this basically cross-cutting technologies, and what we're talking about there is the energy-water nexus. And it's kind of ironic that a water agency and a DOE agency would forget energy-water nexus, but we did. So what we've added here are the membranes, thermal, recycling, concentrate, innovative technologies, these really, really far out things, not just the stepwise incremental improvements, but we want to see step changes in technology. And that's where the crazies, and I always like to talk about crazies, this is where the brilliant scientist that we think is nuts today actually does something that shakes the foundations of our beliefs. And in essence, you can look at membranes as having done that. Membranes didn't exist, well, of course, the human body had them, but membranes as a technology did not exist until the late 60s. And it took us many, many years to really learn how to do those separations. Before that, it was a laboratory curiosity, and nobody could figure out how to do it on a large scale. They were too thick. Took too long for the osmosis to occur. And again, this is a really, really busy slide. The only reason I put it up here is just to show you that we took all of these concepts and put them into a graphic in each of the areas within our vision. And what we're trying to do is to show that in the near term, these are some of the things we would like to be able to work in. These are some of the ideas that we think could be worked on. This all needs to be fleshed out. This was just a first shot at it. But again, we have critical objectives. We want to do these reductions by 20%. And you ask, how did we come up with 20%? That's what the National Academies asked. And we do have a rationale, but it isn't firm enough. And that's why one of our next steps is to work with the National Academies to put more science to our initial estimates. And of course here we're saying 80% capital costs, energy efficiency, operating costs, 0 liquid discharge. Pretty aggressive. So why do we do research and demonstration? I'm just going to sort of wrap up on the roadmap. It's to help policymakers create options. No one that has to solve a problem wants to be told you have only one solution. They want to see what the different solutions are, what the different trade-offs are, and what will work best for a given situation. Every situation is different. From my perspective in the federal sector, we help fund research because we want to help push technology along by taking on risk that private industry is unwilling to take because they don't make profits, that the individual inventor can't take because the inventor doesn't have the deep pockets. And so basically we want to share the risk of R&D, and we want it to encourage the universities and the private sector to work together with the utilities that have the needs. We also want to be able to show that what we're doing has sustainability attached to it, that these things that we're doing aren't going to harm our future generations. We have a mandate to provide this information. Unlike the private sector, we don't keep secrets. Private sector has to have competitive advantage. We don't. We want to find the information and get it out so everyone can play with it. And that one crazy out there who sees the world differently grabs that and creates something new, and does the step change in technology that possibly could occur in desalination. See, we want to create, of course, share knowledge, and this idea of create confidence in technologies and science. This is a real interesting one. Some of the researchers we work with have something they call the valley of death. And their valley of death is this idea of, okay, we've gotten lots of research funding, we've gotten companies interested, but on the other side, you've got utilities that need to buy this stuff. They're so conservative that they aren't going to invest in it. So how do you take a good idea, a partially finished product, and get it across to where the utilities actually use it? And this is an area where I think the federal government can can take away some of that risk. And at the very end, I'll mention that we are going to be funding for the first time this year demonstration projects. It's the demonstration project that allows the politicians to get out there and have their pictures taken with the equipment, have the utilities go out there and see that it actually works over a long period of time, that this isn't just something that's goofy. Well, anyways. The idea here is to help get new technology into use more rapidly. Now, some of the things that we're working on, I just wanted to show the breadth of ideas out there. This stuff's been going on for many, many years. So it's not that some of these things are all that new. One of the things that we're working on are the photovoltaic reverse osmosis system. I had to look because we did a photovoltaic electrodialysis system recently too. And the idea here is to use renewable energy to run a desal system. And so we've got a company that has a DARPA grant on photovoltaics working on desal, so they're actually learning from us how to do this better. One of the big things that we're dealing with right now is this Tularosa facility. Senator Domenici has been very, very supportive, maybe directive is a better way, that we build a desalination demonstration facility in the Tularosa Basin in Alamogordo, New Mexico. And so that's what we're doing. We're going to have a bunch of research bays. We're going to actually break ground in April. It looks like this will be about a $13 million facility. It'll be available to industry and others, specifically looking at groundwater desal and concentrate disposal. But we can also do other things. It ends up that the Navy is going to send a unit here for initial testing and then leave it with us. The Navy's got a whole separate research program that I could talk about if anybody's interested. I mentioned concentrate disposal. We're trying all sorts of almost crazy ideas. Devaporation is one. This is a thermal process. Basically, we're evaporating water from the surface and we're recondensing it on a different surface. And we thought this would be great for rural inland communities that have non-technical people. So we could produce fresh water maybe in North Africa or on our Native American reservations, things like that. But it ends up there's a strange technical quirk to this. And it ends up that we may be actually able to create salt on the surface of the water as the water evaporates off. And we'll get a slurry of salt coming out the end of this. So it ends up that what we're pursuing right now is concentrate disposal with this, not fresh water. Later we'll pursue the fresh water. This is out at the Salton Sea. I think any idea that's ever existed has been tested at the Salton Sea. And if you ski, you'll recognize this. This is a snowblower. The idea here is to enhance evaporation. So we're breaking the water up into little droplets and dropping salt down and evaporating water into the sky. Only just a slight problem with this one. Well, there's a little bit of carryover with wind and things, but the big one is energy. Tremendous energy user. So we didn't get to use our snowblowers out there. We have other things we've been working on too, but I won't go into those. Big step change in technology for people that aren't aware. Wastewater treatment is going to go through a radical change, and it's called membrane bioreactors. And this is a couple different ones down in the city of San Diego. We've been working with Montgomery Watson Harza in the city for the last 8 years to take a closer look at these technologies. And the whole field is burgeoning. You can treat this stuff to a higher quality in a smaller footprint than you can with conventional wastewater treatment. It also ends up that, and this is where our interest is you can take these things and hook them directly into an RO unit and desalt the product coming out of your sewage. And so this then leads to indirect potable reuse. And it's a big issue in California, so I'm not going to go into indirect potable or direct potable reuse. But it ends up the city of San Diego has got to do something about the sewage they're dumping into the ocean. And they're landlocked. Their current plant has taken up all the land space. So this very well may be where we first see an application of this, because we can do a lot more intensive treatment of wastewater with this technology. I had mentioned high energy pumps. People who have heard about desalination probably know that the city of Long Beach has a process that they're testing using Bureau of Reclamation's money and their money called nanofiltration followed by nanofiltration. And this again is one of those crazy ideas. When I went to the first meeting on this, I told the guy, no one in their right mind would consider this. And I said, that's a good reason to patent it. And of course, they were patenting it at the time. And there are a lot of engineers still out there saying this won't work. But it's intriguing. It does look like maybe there is something going on where we can reduce some of the capital costs, we can reduce some of the chemical or energy consumption, and maybe have deal with some of the issues surrounding boron. Boron is an issue in desalting seawater. And so really what our purpose in the Bureau of Reclamation is, I have people in my group that have helped set up the test program with the intent of doing two parallel systems. So we know for real, is there a cost benefit in this technology? Because it's not dramatic. And again, it's one of these things where, you know, it's nice to have several tools in your toolbox, because it may be that this has some advantages over the existing technologies, like the boron and other things. And I'll just continue on through some of this. We've done some funding to improve the B core mix modeling, using or looking at effluents that are more dense than seawater. We're just finished, or our principal investigator, who's actually right there, she just finished up her study in Texas on pretreatment for seawater reverse osmosis and costs. And she still doesn't have it done, which is really frustrating, because it ends up that everybody wants this after Tampa Bay, because everybody wants to know about pretreatment and how best to do it. And we looked at ultrafiltration and microfiltration pretreatment, which is more advanced than what they did in Tampa Bay. And of course, this is Yuma, treating irrigation return flows. We've got a lot of work going on still in the San Joaquin Valley. Okay, getting into the next steps. This is the part that I said I could spend the whole talk on. In the next couple of weeks, we will be advertising a request for full proposals on desalination research. We have several $1 million to spend, and we're looking at laboratory scale, and we spend up to $100,000 of our money. Pilot scale, we spend up to $270,000 of our money. And actually a couple of demonstration plants where we'll be spending over 3 years up to $1.5 million of our money. We don't know what projects will come in, and we review these with an expert panel, and it's merit reviewed, and it's very competitive. So if you're interested, I'll have a website in the next slide or two that will direct you to this. This is some of the fun stuff. Congress asked us to identify obstacles, physical, financial, institutional, regulatory, to net new water. And this is the idea of where say, the city of Las Vegas pays for a desalting plant in Los Angeles. Los Angeles says, gosh, you know, we don't need some of the water that we would normally take out of the Colorado River. In Las Vegas, you can use it. That makes a lot of sense, sounds easy, extremely complicated, and it's so politically charged that this is an in-house study. We aren't involving any of our stakeholders, because even internally, people well, our first meeting is tomorrow morning, and I'm going to miss the first part of it, but it's going to be fun to hear what just the Bureau people have to say about this one. And so the idea here is to develop tools for our planners. Now, we also are going to do a water portfolio study, and in about 2 weeks we're going to have 5 or 6 economists, several from California, mostly resource economists, come and brainstorm the idea of using modern portfolio theory, which you use in retirement portfolio analysis, to look at water. Basically, in your portfolio, your investment portfolio, you'd never invest in Enron stock for your retirement. You know, you diversify. Well, it's common sense that you would diversify in your water portfolio. And every city is going to be different, but everybody kind of knows that, but nobody puts any numbers to it. And there's a belief out there that we can actually put numbers to that, and we can, as a guide, go to the finance sector and say, hey guys, you know, how about water? We've got the ocean out there, which kind of acts like gold in a sense. It doesn't follow the market being the hydrologic cycle. That ocean just sits out there. So what value does that water coming out of the ocean give to a diversified portfolio? I mean, everybody gets excited when we talk about it, but nobody ever sits down and does it. So we got some money put aside to actually sit down and do it. And I had mentioned earlier, we're going to continue the road mapping activities, start to drill down into these technologies, identify projects that need to be funded, work with stakeholders and go to Congress and get the funding to achieve those projects. And it ends up that it won't just be the National Research Council helping us to better define the science behind this, But also we've got the American Water Works Research Foundation that's just dying to delve into this in drinking water. All of their utilities want to better understand what the needs are. Congress asked us to do a desalination clearinghouse. This has kind of slid a bit this year, which is really, really not good. But we still have a website. We have all of our reports, about 100 reports on the website. They're all in PDF. We continue to do a newsletter. So we're trying to keep people up to date, but we want to actually go into a database of all the desalting plants in the US, try to define the field better so that people aren't generating this stuff over and over and over again. I'd mentioned earlier we want to do a study with USGS to figure out where the brackish sources are, how accessible they are. Would they really add in a sustainable way to water supply? I don't think those answers are out there yet. We're working to reauthorize the Desalination Act that Senator Simon put into place before he retired, and a guy named Jack Jorgensen, who's one of my mentors, actually helped Senator Simon write. It's very, very focused on desal research and ultimately to the benefit of the international community, not just to the US, but to others who probably have even more need than we do. And speaking of the international community, I wanted just to bring these guys up. The World Bank is just finishing a study right now on desalination to educate their staff as to what the opportunities are. They've been looking in Asia, in North Africa, Middle East, and I haven't seen the final draft of the study yet, but they've had a bunch of experts working on it for about 6 months. WHO will be doing a conference in May in Bahrain to start to set guidelines for drinking water I can't say standards, guidelines for drinking water that's produced by desalination. And just think of it this way, desalination can produce water so pure that we know we have to add ions back, otherwise it tears the pipes apart, your infrastructure will just dissolve. Well, what are the best ions to add back? How does that affect public health? All of those issues. And so it ends up that their first meeting to set up the committees, there will be about 5 committees that will be studying this over the next year or two. The first meeting to set up those committees will occur in May. Food and Agricultural Organization of the UN is doing a meeting in 2 weeks on what is the future of desalination in agriculture. I still think this is a crazy idea, but I was dying to go to this, and I just found out on my way here that I'll have to wait and see what they do. I won't be able to go. But the other one is MEDRIC, which you may never heard of, but it's the Middle East Desalination Research Center. It's something that I've been involved in since it was created, and this is an outcome from the Middle East peace process. It was recognized when we had an active Middle East peace process that water and refugees and other things were critical to the region. And so one of the only outcomes, there was a water data bank that was done, and then there was also this creation of this research center. And the idea here is, and it continues to this day, that technical people will work with each other in spite of their political differences. If they have tremendous need, they will work together. And so this cost workshop that MEDRIC's going to sponsor that I've been working on, we have a Palestinian, a Kuwaiti, 2 Israelis, Cypriot, Scotsman, and a couple of US people all working together to put this thing on. And we'll have speakers from all over the world to do this, to figure out what are the real costs of desalination. So in spite of the peace process, this works. And I want to digress just for a second. There is something in your backyard that we've been playing with. And it's from my perspective, sitting in Denver, it's just really, really neat because I don't get to go to Alcatraz very often. But it ends up that Alcatraz is not one of your water-rich places. And it ends up that we have a captive audience. We've got 1.4 million visitors that the Park Service takes over there every year. And it ends up that the superintendent of the park has a plan to change Alcatraz from kind of the rundown situation it is in now into something like, is it Crissy Field that they recently redid? They want to go back and redo this. And I looked at this as, man, here's a whole captive audience for advanced technology in water. And so we've been playing around, and they desperately need water. And people pay to go out there. So what we've been looking at, we've done an appraisal study. We've been looking at fixing the cisterns and capturing rainwater. We want to do reuse, recycle the water. We want to do desal. And we want to do it in a sustainable way where all the energy on Alcatraz is renewable. So the idea here, what we started with Brian at the Park Service and my research director, Shannon, what we started with was this vision of, we want this to be a demonstration of what we can do with technology, with water and energy. And right now it's languishing just a little bit and it needs a good kick. But it's a great vision. It gets me really excited. And then I said I would give you some ideas of where information is available from us. So concentrate is extremely important. We have basically created a baseline on this for inland cities. And it's got a database of what current plants are doing. We have our own cost model that we use simply because we couldn't trust what other people were doing, whether it was a commercial product and it was biased towards a particular vendor, or whether it was a country who had a bias towards some sort of subsidization. And this is what we hope to take this and some others and expand them in December this year. With the American Water Works Association, we have taken all the old research, about, in today's dollars, $1.4 billion worth of research, and put it onto 12 CD-ROMs. We scanned 1,200 reports. We're continuing to add to it. We're adding AWWA's, a journal. We're adding a bunch of stuff. And the idea here is, well, for me, the reason I wanted it is so that when someone proposes to us, I can go back and see what's been done. I don't know that other people have figured that out yet, but it's a great database for me to figure out what's been done so that we don't duplicate research. This last year we finished a planner's handbook. It's really good for engineers, not so good for non-engineers. Our homepage would keep you up to date on any advertisements, solicitations, and things like we're going to do in the next week or two. Newsletter talks about our solicitations and some of the projects we've done, and then of course all of our reports are in PDF and downloadable. Thank you.
We have a lot of time for questions, comments. Oh, please.
It's Connor Everett from the statewide Environmental Desal Working Group. I'm sorry I missed a little bit of the beginning, but I've been following the issue of the state desal task force that went around the state to discuss the issues. I guess I'd like to talk about what the social impacts are of desal when you go beyond just the engineering potential for it. Because we really haven't seen a large-scale successful desal plant in the country, with Tampa Bay not working and the Yuma desalter not working. And we've kind of been through this in the early 90s with Santa Barbara was going to do the same thing you mentioned, where they were going to do an exchange of water with Las Vegas. And it never really happened because it wasn't cost effective to actually run their desalter. So they got it up and running right off the highway. You can see it if you go through. So to me, there's an issue of the cost of desal and the impacts on who that cost would be on. And there's many unanswered environmental impacts as well. And I was wondering if you would address any of those and talk about some of those issues as well as just the technology.
The social aspects of desal, that isn't really an area that I feel I have any expertise in, to tell you the truth. I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East working on projects with them, and so I get to see what happens when you have no water or you have very limited water. And in that case, desal makes a lot of sense. But the social impacts, I guess maybe the easiest or the way that I could answer you the best is that that's how I view our in-house study for net new water. It includes the social impacts in that, and we're really hitting it from the economist's point of view, the resource economist's point of view. But it's still, it's internal because this stuff is so sensitive, and Reclamation hasn't taken a stand on this. I can say that Reclamation is, our political appointees are very adamant that we not see our budget go towards building major infrastructure. They're much more interested in seeing us try to push the technology and bring the cost down. So if anything, that's where my agency is. There are a lot of people that would like to see my agency paying for these plants just like we pay in Title 16 for a lot of the water reuse plants. What will actually happen, I don't know. The social side of it really is going to be, I don't think you'll see the work I do or my agency leading that.
So I appreciate the work the Bureau does in both reclamation and conservation we've done in California without their support. And I would like to offer up that we're doing a workshop in Monterey on May 7th, talking about all these issues, and I'll leave brochures up here for you or anyone else who's interested. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes?
You mentioned the energy cost. How come can solar power contribute to the reduction of that energy cost, or have you explored that, or because the technology as far as solar power is becoming much more sophisticated, and it seems that that could be a possible percentage of the energy.
Well, renewable energy, it ends up that when my group was redone 10 years ago, we took in what was called the Special Technologies Group, and they were all the renewables people. Unfortunately, most of them have retired, but still, it gave us a different perspective on renewables. If all you're going to do with renewables is produce electricity, then in reality, it doesn't have a lot of interest to our program, because we want to go to the lowest cost electricity source possible. Now, but if there's something unique about a renewable source, where there's some twist to it that improves the desalting process, then that is of interest. And so, for instance, electrodialysis, where you can use electricity directly to separate the ions, that interested us. And so what we did is we took some of the commercially available stuff, changed all the alternating current to direct current, and just got a feel for what could we actually do with a photovoltaic panel and a direct current, because that's actually how electrodialysis works. They actually have to take it AC and convert it to DC. So we said, let's just do it directly and see what we can do. Another issue on renewables, for instance, one of the things that's come up in the task force, the California Desal Task Force, has been wave energy. Well, you know what? There's some really neat stuff there. If what you're doing is producing pressure with wave energy, not electricity, but pressure, that has some unique aspects to reverse osmosis, which is driven by pressure. So we can skip a couple of steps that create inefficiencies in these processes. There's another one that we're playing with right now on the Salton Sea, and I didn't throw it up here because it's just in the formative stages. But we're looking at desalting Salton seawater using a vertical tube evaporator, a thermal process, boiling the water. And darned if, well, first off, we're going to take the waste energy from Cal Energy that's using geothermal to produce electricity. So we're going to take their waste heat from their plant, do desal. We figure we could do 20 million gallons per day of desal on the heat they currently waste. And they said, well, we really can't do this project unless you give us back the salt and some water to re-inject back into the formation to improve our heat extraction. Well, darn, that's nobody's ever asked us to give the salt back. So again, if there's a twist on the renewables, then I think it has great research interest. But if it's just producing electricity, then it just goes into every other electrical source, and it's got to be something special.
The multinational corporations that are interested in water from the point of view of blue gold, do you think they have any concerns about your research and its application? Because it seems to me that you'll be taking, to a certain extent, money out of their pockets because they plan on commercializing drinkable water.
Well, if you look at a Vivendi or whatever they are now, I can't remember what they've changed their name to, Veolia or something. Anyways, if you look at the French model, which they're out there buying up lots of water concessions, you'll find if you dig down into them, they've got all sorts of desalting companies. So anything that we do to bring down the cost is just going to put more money in their pocket. I would see it as a benefit to them. Here, I'll do one down here.
You mentioned in passing about using an option of co-location, something like that.
Yes.
What does it mean exactly, co-location?
Well, the idea of co-location is using, and this is where Tampa Bay was ahead of its time. They use the intake from the power plant, so they don't have to build that, and they use the outfall from the power plant, so they don't have to use that. And then since the idea for a power plant is to use the seawater for cooling, it raises the temperature of the seawater a little bit, which is actually going to improve the amount of water that goes through a membrane for a given pressure. So there's a lot of ancillary benefits. Now, if you go to the Middle East, it's not just co-location anymore, it's dual purpose. And so you can use the less energy and valuable steam to do desal and save the higher valued steam to do electricity. But it's kind of hard to change the ratio between those, because the ratio does change over the year. Because at times, you want water, and at other times you want electricity. But with the way they've set up their infrastructure, you have to have both together. So it ends up, one of the things I didn't throw up here is what's called a hybrid plant. And that's where you use a RO membrane plant or a nanofiltration plant, even more importantly, to remove some of the salts. And that allows the efficiencies on the thermal plants to go up because you can go to higher temperatures. There's a reason why it's taken so long to do desal. It's very, very complex, and it's not just a chemical engineer or a mechanical engineer. It's everybody out there. And years ago, there was a paper written called For Want of a Nail. It was written by a guy named Professor Silver. The guy used to write plays, but he also was a guy that put the mathematics to multi-stage flash and made it so we could understand it. And Professor Silver wrote this nice little research paper in this For Want of a Nail. And basically his whole premise was they could not make thermal desal work until they figured out that the sparingly soluble salts were what were scaling up their heat transfer surfaces. And they forgot to talk to a chemist, because they already knew what salts were in the water, but they didn't realize that these ones that were in at very, very low levels were the ones that would be the problem. It's not the ones that were in at the high level that were the problem. So it's a great scientific paper. It'd be great for young kids.
Do we have to retool the existing plant to accommodate the seawater?
The existing desal plant or the existing?
I mean, but the co-located.
The co-located? No, I don't think you have to retune the plant. I think the real issue is will the power plant always be there to provide the water, the tremendous water supplies that originally justified the existence of the desal plant? Because part of it is that the concentrate is getting mixed into this cooling water, so you don't see a very high salinity rise into a bay or an estuary or a coastal environment. So.
Expand on this brine disposal, which is often the tail wagging the dog. Things that are methodologies that are looking economical as well as environmentally acceptable. And inland, I think, is going to be a bigger problem than on the ocean, as you just mentioned.
Expand on it a bit?
Yeah, what kind of methodologies are looking favorable just on the brine disposal problem?
Historically, it's been evaporation ponds, which is great when you're out in the desert. And it's great when you don't have endangered species, and it's great when you've got lots of land that's essentially free. Many of those issues don't exist anymore in Phoenix or Las Vegas. So evaporation pond, that's traditional. Of course, there's concerns about polluting the groundwater, that kind of thing too. Another one is deep well injection. This is something that Texas is looking at. We're actually helping Texas Water Development Board to do a project in this. The idea there is to take some of the old oil wells and just re-inject the brine concentrate down into those. City of El Paso has been looking at that. The City of El Paso went through all sorts of concentrate disposal techniques, and I think finally settled on deep well injection. Now, I don't know. I mean, that's problematic. That has issues surrounding it. For instance, we have a well on the Colorado River where one of the tributaries to the Colorado River, it's called the Paradox Valley Unit, it goes across a collapsed salt dome. We pull out all of this salt that then goes into the river and comes down to everybody in LA and San Diego to drink. So the Bureau put in a project to pull that salt water out before it went into the river, and we deep well inject it down about 5 miles. And there are issues surrounding that for us in that it looks like we're maybe plugging the formation. I could go into some of the technical reasons why that is. But one of the fun ones was sitting in Denver, we got to see in the newspaper that we were causing earthquakes. And that doesn't go over very well with the public. And it's very much like Rocky Flats that we're doing deep well injection. So deep well injection, the zero liquid discharge has been around for years. It's just an evaporative technology where you take the water all the way to salt and you recapture the vapor as fresh water. I'm trying to think of what else. But the guy that we funded to do this, that's this concentrate disposal manual. He talks about all of these things. And for me, that was creating a baseline. This is where we are today. You know, we don't need to do any more research on this stuff. Figure out where we can go from here. And the American Water Works Research Foundation has just awarded this last week a $400,000 grant, at least their money, and California Energy Commission money, to go into zero liquid discharge research. And I think you'll see the same thing from Water Reuse Foundation. They've got a bunch of our money, and there's 4 projects being advertised right now with our money on that. Let me go back here for a second. Yes.
My question is kind of twofold. The first one is, it seems like building an RO plant today is kind of like buying a computer where, a year's time it's going to be, $50 million cheaper. So for that diagram that you had, the map of the United States, where there were proposed plans, would you recommend that they wait 5 or 10 years before actually breaking ground, where they might be able to save quite a bit of money?
That's a great question, because that's what research is all about. And let me answer it in a strange way. The latest thermal plants going into the Middle East, the heat transfer surfaces are being made out of titanium. And they're thrilled because these plants are going to last 100 years. Now, is that a good bet on technology? I'm not sure that I would bet that way. Somehow you have to balance the need against the risk of technological change. I can't predict, and maybe that's where the National National Academies can really help us. I can't predict how much give there is in bringing down the costs. We aren't, on reverse osmosis, we aren't near the theoretical limit on the amount of energy, or the lowest amount of energy to actually separate the salt. So there are improvements that can still be made when you look at the theoretical side of things. And I think the National Academies in their proposal are going to help us to more clearly define all of those opportunities. And maybe that would help a decision maker make a bet.
Now, if the Bureau could potentially make these RO plants very economically feasible for almost anyone to build, do you foresee sort of losing our coastlines to lots of desalination plants? I mean, you'd have a beach, but you'd also have a desalination plant with pipes running along the beaches.
Oh, there's, I guess I could see enough population someday that who knows? I mean, you got to provide them water, and who knows what could happen. I would sure hope that never happens. There are other ways too to maybe bury your pipes and actually collect the water through the beach itself. Use that as kind of a sand filter. I mean, there's all sorts of ways to tweak the technology, but it's a scary thought to have so many people that you'd have desal plants up and down the coast.
Well, I mean, if they just became so, economically feasible, I think that a lot of places might just opt to put in an RO plant versus conservation or other alternatives.
Well, I think what I've heard during the California Desal Task Force is right, and I've heard it from some of the utility directors. And that is the first thing that they should be doing is conservation. The second thing they should be doing is recycling. And once they're successful and doing those well, then they can start looking at the more costly things like desalination. I think looking at one thing as your solution is a huge mistake. It's got to be part of that toolbox that I talked about. So.
Well, I want to ask you about cost. You showed a diagram, showed declining cost, and I think you said that all these figures come from different methodologies. And I guess the question is, do you have any good information about real total costs is that something you're working on? I mean, for example, we read in the press things like one of your co-location proposal to be done in Carlsbad, down in Southern California, in northern San Diego County. Does anyone have good data about what the real costs of such operations are?
I actually feel comfortable with some of the costs that are being thrown out there. They are life cycle costs. It's just that that everybody subsidizes these things in different ways, and they need to be public about this. It can't be hidden away. And the reports of seawater desal costs coming in at about, I can live with $3 a 1,000 gallons as being the real cost of seawater desal right now. The Israelis would, I think, argue with me and say it's more like $1.50 a 1,000 gallons. But if you really look close, they've got subsidized energy. And I'm not even sure that they had to pay for the land costs. So I don't know. Hopefully, the ultimate goal here is to create a methodology where I'm sure a country and the vendor will report one cost, but a halfway competent engineer could work through this process and say, no, with the life cycle costing and our understanding of the site-specific issues, this is what their cost is. And I'd actually feel comfortable saying, $3 a 1,000 gallons I think is doable based on what I've been seeing, and that's pretty.
$1,000 an acre foot.
Yes, and that's considering where we were 20 years ago, that's surprisingly low. It's still not low enough to be competitive with cheap water.
And that includes, numbers like that include salt disposition and transportation and so forth?
The answer is yes, but there is an assumption that goes with that, and that's that it's a seawater plant and it's diffused back into the ocean. And there seems to be, and I'm not the expert in this, but there seems to be pretty good information that this can be done in the right locations. I'm sure there are places where you can put it in and it's going to raise the salinity. There's been issues in the press in the Gulf, the Arabian Gulf, that the salinity is going up because the desalting plants are desalting all the water. Well, it's not really true. If you look at it, it's the Tigris and Euphrates no longer go into it. That has a lot more impact than a desalting plant. So I don't have a good answer.
In a sense, desalting is a reversal of the mining and depletion of resource, in the sense that we are producing more and more salt. In the case of conventional mining, you deplete a resource. Here we are using the opposite, that by desalting plants we accumulate more and more salt over long periods of time. And the question is whether it will, at least in Division, maybe 100 years or so, we will be all right. Take Salton Sea, for example. Salt will continue to accumulate.
For nature, this is how nature does things. This is how the human body does things. Our human body is set up to remove salts, and we excrete it. So there is no simple solution to say, well, the salt will be destroyed. The idea that looking at the salt as a resource has been around for many, many years. It's just that when you start to look at the magnitude of the mass of the salt, it's phenomenal. I wish I would have, one of these days, I guess I have to make a slide. I've actually done the calculations a couple of times. But when you have a 25 million gallon per day desalting plant, you're producing probably thousands of tons. Water is 3.4%, 3.5% salt by weight. So figure out how many pounds of water you're creating, and 3.5% of that is your solid.
I think
it's not trivial.
I think what you're saying is absolutely true. What modern technology does is in a very massive way interfere with nature, whereas nature distributes things much larger area and recycles things. And so this is the conflict we have, the way the human economics works and the way nature works. We have to learn to balance those. Maybe that's the next project.
But we did fund one project with a guy in University of North Carolina that I think is just being finalized right now, where he did go through all the salt products from a seawater plant, and he found 2 locations in the U.S. where we could put a seawater plant and have the majority of the salts used by the chemical process industry. And I'm a skeptic. I want to see that report and really look at his numbers, and then talk to some people in industry and see, is that for real? If it is, man, those are no-brainer plants. Texas, one's in Texas and one's in California. But that's just, when something's too good to be true, it usually is.
Any more questions?
Yes.
I think I heard you mention that Tampa Bay was not operating.
Well, actually, that's incorrect. Tampa Bay is operating the last time I talked to somebody, but it's not operating the way that it's supposed to. So I talked to one of the ladies that's involved in the lawsuit, and she said, actually, it is operating, but all of us believe that it's not. It is a pretreatment issue. Depending on who you talk to, they feel that the existing pretreatment should be pulled out, scrapped, a new system put in. If you talk to Poseidon, obviously they're quite upset by that scenario, and they believe that there are just some relatively straightforward engineering fixes. We did 2 workshops, one in Tampa Bay for 2 days and one in San Diego for 2 days about a month ago, sponsored by the International Desalting Association. We brought people from overseas in, and I chaired one panel that included both sides on this, and we were very, very careful not to let the 2 sides really go at it. It's a sensitive thing. There is no question that there's no question that there are pretreatments that will work with seawater RO. The one at Tampa Bay is not working with seawater RO, and Tampa Bay now owns the plant, and they're going to fix it. And if they have to, they will spend the money necessary to fix it. That's what I've heard from them, anyways.
I have a fairly simple question. I think one of your early slides showed cost comparisons for seawater and brackish water desal, and there was a per acre foot cost for conservation.
That's life cycle cost of infrastructure, and that came from our planner from well, he used to be the planner for the Southern California area office that helped implement a lot of the conservation programs, and he now works for me in desalting. So. Okay, I can give you his name. Yeah, he's in Sacramento. He gets to telecommute to Denver. That's Steve, yeah. If anybody knows Steve, yeah, if you know Steve, just give him a call.
Questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.